He froze on the hillside as the wind combed the chaparral into hush. Binoculars hovered in his hands. The lenses caught a slice of granite and sky. Two bobcats stood on a rocky ledge, cut from light and shadow. Ear tufts lifted, tails flicked once. Then stillness. Evan knew the rule. Give space. Back away. Leave the wild to the wild. He capped his pencil, slid the notebook into his pack, shifted one careful step. The insects stopped. Birdsong folded like a book. The air thinned, precise as glass. He turned, and the third one was there, 20 feet behind him, planted in bunch grass with the gravity of a verdict. Broader shoulders, deeper chest, a matriarch who had earned this ground. Her yellow eyes held him level, measuring, not startled, not afraid. From the ledge, the two younger cats flowed down like pawed shadow. The three arranged themselves into a crescent, closing his clean escape. Evan lowered to a crouch, spine rounded, hands open where they could be seen. Do not stare, do not run, make yourself small. Let instinct pass you by. His heartbeat moved into his throat. The taste of metal rose under his tongue. Pine resin rode the air, sharp as memory. Dust ticked down the slope. No snarl came, no rush of muscle, only the soft pat of paws, a whisper through oak grass. Pressure touched his shoulder, firm, measured, deliberate, not claws, a forehead, a nudge set exactly where a body balances. He held still. The world brightened at the edges. She stood so near he counted whiskers, fanned across a soot-dusted muzzle. Her breath was warm even, the gaze stayed steady, deep and assessing. Something in that look reached backward through years he had not named. His eyes traveled the arc of her shoulder to the foreleg. There, along the inside, fur failed and skin ran pale and smooth. A clean, narrow strip, like a creek mapped across faded paper. It turned the air around him electric. He did not mean to speak. The word slipped past his caution. Ember. The younger cats eased, reading their mother's posture. Ears softened. Tails wrote small punctuation over the grass. No threat, no claim. Only a still, unsettling ceremony he did not yet understand. Wind crossed the ridge and carried water scent from the revived creek below. Light rang on stone. A beetle stitched the dust between his boots. Evan kept his hands quiet and his eyes soft. He would not reach. Somewhere inside his chest, a thought surfaced and held. If she is who I think she is, the wild remembers. A decade earlier, this valley was the color of bone. Ash lay in drifts against blackened trunks, and manzanita stood like wire singed to the core. People named the blaze a complex, then a season, then a record, as if labels could corral what heat had done. Afterward, the wind learned to whistle through charcoal. It carried the faint, metallic taste of things unmade. Now the forest remembers. Moss quilts fallen limbs. Indian paintbrush stitches red along the slope. Lupine shoulders up in blue torches where nothing had stood but cinder. Ceanothus flushes violet and sweet, bribing bees back to their roots. Down in the draw, a thin creek that once died into dust frets over stones, throwing ribbons of light through willow roots. Resilience is what the reports say. Standing here, it feels less like science and more like a place waking from a difficult dream. Evan comes to weigh that waking without disturbing it. 42, quiet by habit, he wears a hat bleached by seasons and boots that remember other ridges. His pack sags with the honest weight of glass and paper, binoculars in a scuffed case, rangefinder, GPS, a pencil shaved to a stub, a field notebook lank with use. He has learned to move as if the land were listening, which it is. He keeps his shoulders low, his steps soft, and his curiosity on a leash. He sets up on a gentle rise where chaparral gives a view of the valley's long seam. A breeze travels upslope like a careful hand, combing the oak grass into pale arrows. Sun warms the granite until it smells faintly of iron. When he kneels, but the earth presses a cool, clean damp through the knees of his pants, a reminder that green begins below sight. He opens the notebook. Quercus douglasii, vigorous sapling cohort. Beneath that, a line about Ceanothus as pioneer, fixing nitrogen under hard eclipses of summer. He sketches a band of lupine with quick, economical marks. Data is a way of telling yourself the truth twice, once with eyes, once with measure. He lifts the binoculars, grids the far slope, then lets the glass drift to a cluster of old stumps, softened by moss. A scrub jay scolds and shoots away, blue as a dropped bead. 10 years ago he wore the same hat, newer, and carried a different weight. He wasn't on an engine. He hauled water and hose, ferried meals, folded tarps that smoked at the seams. After the fronts passed, he walked with a small crew, scanning gullies for movement. He learned the posture of aftermath, how to kneel slowly, how to look without breaking a body already nearly broken, how to speak softly into air too thin to hold kindness. Many days held nothing he could change. Some held a life caught inside a moment that did not want witnesses. From that season, he kept one rule that matters more than all the others: help, then disappear. Intervention is not possession. Rescue, when justified, must end in return. The wild cannot owe you anything and stay wild. He pours a little water on his bandana and wipes dust from the binoculars' eye cups. The lenses blink clear. Across the valley, a hawk unzips the sky and folds into a dive. The grass replies with the quick, startled shiver that means somebody else will eat tonight. He makes a mark in the margin. Prey, base active. Patch mosaic provides cover. Work like this is patient. Hours of nothing that add up to something you can defend with numbers. Silence shifts around him, not empty, but watchful. He recognizes the tone. This country keeps many kinds of quiet. There is the quiet of absence, when smoke has driven sound away. There is the quiet of noon, a siesta written into shrubs. And there is the quiet that draws a boundary around you, reminding you to mind your size. He respects all of them. He lowers the binoculars and stretches his fingers, easing the ache that fieldwork writes into knuckles. Then he breathes the place the way you breathe before speaking to someone you admire. Pine resin, warm rock, damp leaf litter, the ghost of last winter's rain stored in duff. Below him, the creek counts stones in a voice too small for maps. He lets the counting steady him. He waits. He begins the slow dance of retreat. Straps snugged without creak, canteen clipped, the notebook slid home as if returning a bird to its nest. He shifts his weight onto the slope's outside edge, a small geometry that keeps gravel quiet. Give space. Yield the ridgeline. Take the long way down and leave the hour to its rightful owners. Then the hour changes shape. Silence lowers like a lid. The drone of insects cinches shut. Even the sun feels muffled, as if light has to pass through felt. He registers the signal the way a body recognizes thunder before any cloud appears. You are no longer alone, and the rules have consequences. She stands behind him where there had been nothing a breath ago, close enough for the grass to bend around her hop, larger than the pair on the ledge. Broader in the chest and sure in the feet, not a curiosity, a presence. Authority rides the set of her shoulders like a cloak. Yellow eyes hold him level, not hostile, not soft, measuring. The two cats above float down the ledge without sound, their weight carried on muscle tuned to stone. They take positions that turn his straight line into a curve with no easy exit. 3 notes become a chord. He is the silence in its center. Evan sinks to a crouch, palms open, gaze lowered to the grass where light needles through seed heads. He places breathing in a low register. The field protocols arrive like remembered prayers. Make yourself small. Do not lock eyes. Never run. Wait for information. Information arrives as pressure. A forehead sets against his shoulder with weight precisely where balance lives, not a shove, not a feint. Deliberate contact that belongs more to introduction than to warning. He does not reach. He counts a long breath and lets the moment name itself. He studies what he can see without raising his head. Scapular ridge, gloss of coat, steady draw and release of breath. Then his eyes find the foreleg, the inner line where fur pauses and a narrow band of pale skin takes over. Clean margin, old burn, a map he once knew by touch. Memory folds the distance in half, the shed, the saline. The way a tremor travels through a wild body that is learning not to panic, not because it trusts you, but because survival is busy with other tasks. He feels the hum roll up through his bones, deep, resonant, unmistakable. Not growl, purr. He hears his own voice, small and unplanned. Ember. Across the crescent, the younger cats soften at the edges, reading their mother's body as if it were weather. Ears ease, tails write one slow comma in the grass. The cord relaxes but does not break. The moment holds. He waits for the swing back to distance. It comes. The matriarch lifts her head from his shoulder and steps away one pace, then another, recalibrating the space between species. She glances toward the drawer where the creek threads light through willow. He understands the vector. This is not a trapping, it is a placing. He keeps his posture low and the hillside breathes again. The hour resumes its shape, but it is not the same hour he entered. Fear does not vanish in a field worker, it learns its place. Evan holds the crouch until his thigh muscles burn, until the grass prints its cool against his palms. He lets his eyes soften. Unfocused enough that movement will tug the corner of his sight, while his posture remains non-threatening. Wind braids the oat grass into pale cords, unbraids them again. No rush, no hiss, only breathing. Hers, then his, trading measures. He has been this close to wild before, but never with history threading the space. The recognition changes nothing and everything. It does not grant safety or cancel teeth. It simply adds a layer, like a second music playing under the first. He tunes to it. The hum returns low and resonant, a purr spun from a chest built to take rabbits in snow and vanish between rocks before the echo knows what happened. He thinks of the shed, how the room learned his shapes as surely as he learned hers, the corrugated roof ticking under noon heat, the metal chair that slicked sweat from the back of his knees. The smell of saline, sharp and clean, cutting through the mineral sweetness of burn cream. He remembers talking in the steady, uncolored way you talk, when your hands need your voice to keep them honest. He read aloud whatever was truest, rainfall totals, germination plots, the distance between two oaks that somehow survived. In that room, trust did not arrive. It accreted, minute by minute, like a sandbar rising between tides. First, a pause before the hiss, then less striking at the air. Then the day she let the rinse flow over damaged skin without choosing to destroy the closest thing. And after that, the first thin purr, hesitant as a match head, gaining because breath kept feeding it. He learned not to mistake tolerance for affection. He learned that respect has a sound. Here, now, respect weighs the afternoon. Ember leans, then withdraws, the way a queen might test the line between two countries. The younger cats watch the treaty being drawn in a language of angles and pauses, their tails idle, tiny metronomes keeping time with whatever their mother decides the hour will be. Their shoulders sit high, ready to become distance in an instant. He could break this by reaching. He could undo years by believing a moment means permission. He does not. A jay skates across the slope, scolding. Somewhere above, a hawk writes a circle no one on the ground has agreed to. The creek keeps counting. Evan feels his own pulse climb down from his throat to the deeper rhythm behind his ribs. The quality of the silence changes, less lid, more bowl. The world has not relaxed. It has become attentive in a friendlier way. Like a room where two old colleagues have recognized each other and left formality at the door. Ember lifts her chin. The light catches the pale seam that once was wound. Scar is the wrong word for what it has become. The body has redrafted it into something like a path. He remembers how that margin found itself. Clean edges tightened a little each dawn. He remembers stopping himself from celebrating and instead marking temperatures, noting appetite, sketching the rate at which fur tufted along the boundary. His notes from that week are both tender and plain, a balance learned the hard way. The cats do a slow, collective recalibration. The crescent widens. A corridor opens between his crouch and the chaparral. Her choice, not his. He understands the gift, not approach, but allowed space, allowed to remain. Allowed to witness what is not his. He breathes in the resin of crushed sage. He breathes out whatever small portion of himself still wants a story more than the truth. He lets the truth have the hillside. Minutes work through their quiet with the patience of lichen. An alligator lizard slips from shadow to shadow, body writing cursive across the warm rock. One of the young bobcats marks a stem with the quick, declarative rake of cheek and whisker. Ember watches without turning her head, a general with eyes in her shoulders. Evan can feel the learning happen in the air, how to stand, how to yield, how to carry weight without threatening ground. He thinks again of boundaries. Rescue had been the rare exception, justified by suffering that could be ended and a path back to independence that could be defended. Rehabilitation had been a disciplined refusal to slide into comfort, a deliberate thinning of contact as health returned. Release had demanded that he shrink himself to the size of weather and let her pass like weather passes. Each step was a narrowing road to one place, absence. He had kept to it, and absence had become the most generous thing he could give. What returns to him now is not the animal. It is proof that absence worked. The purr deepens, then resolves into quiet. Ember steps past him in a line that brushes his invisible edge without crossing it. Her shoulder floats within a hand's breadth of his thigh. Her head turns just enough to acknowledge the shape of him. He feels the warmth of her passing like a pocket of sunlight. He does not watch her go with his eyes. He watches with his skin. With the small hairs along his forearm, with the calibration of breath that says the room has been rearranged by a presence and then gently put back. The younger two go when she goes. Their departure writes a clean sentence in the brush. Subject, verb, purpose. They leave nothing behind but the pressed memory of paw in grass and a drift of scent that says rabbit is plentiful and water is near. Evan waits because waiting is part of his profession and part of his promise. He counts to 60, then to 60 again, and only when the hillside soundscape finds its earlier tonic does he shift his weight. He rises carefully, joints protesting like old hinges. Gravel whispers under his boot and then forgives him. He scans without lifting the binoculars, offering the naked eye instead. A gesture of humility learned from hours among nests and dens. Nothing moves except wind and the opinions of small birds. He lets the matter settle where it is, a memory that belongs to a particular contour of slope and the hour's light. For the first time since the crescent formed, he looks directly at the scar on his own hand, a thin white crescent where a claw once found purchase through leather and skin. He had left that line unremarked in his notes because it did not matter to outcome. Now it glows a little in the sun, a private echo. The body keeps ledgers of what it has learned. It writes them where you can read them when you need to. He lifts the binoculars finally and sweeps the ledges. The cats are not there. The glass finds instead a pair of ravens arguing over who owns thermals and who owns jokes. Beyond, the ridge stacks its blue plates into the afternoon. A squirrel scolds because that is its vocation. Life goes on, tenacious and ordinary, which is the only way it survives disaster. Evan closes the lens caps and feels a tremor work itself out of his fingers. Not weakness. Aftershock. He lets it pass. He does not congratulate himself for not reaching. He simply files the restraint where it belongs among other field decisions that look small and are not. On the back of his notes, he writes a single line: contact initiated by adult female, recognition inferred from old scar, behavior non-aggressive, ceremony unclassified. The last phrase pleases him for its honesty. Not everything fits a column. He stands a little longer until the shade climbs his shins and the creek's voice grows rounder with evening. When he finally shifts to gather his pack, the hillside gives him back to gravity with the easy acceptance of a place that has seen everything. He thinks not as a claim, but as a witness. If she is who I know she is, she has survived exactly as the forest has, by doing what memory requires. Then he turns downslope, leaving the ridge to its elders and its young. He carries with him the shape of a head pressed once to a shoulder, and a sentence that now feels less metaphor than measure. The wild remembers. The day he found her, heat still lived in the ground. Ash lifted in ghosts around his boots, clinging to sweat, softening the world to smudges. He had learned to read for movement after fire, the twitch that is not wind, the shape that fights the habit of stillness. At the base of a blackened oak, a small curl of cat lay knotted into herself, singed to the whiskers. When he knelt, the air tasted of coins. She saw him and gathered what was left. The sound she made was not large, but it filled the gully. Rage braided to exhaustion. Her foreleg left was raw enough that the mind wanted to look away. Skin slick and blistered, edges blackened where heat had licked too long. The pupils were blown wide, not with curiosity, but shock. He radioed, voice kept level by training. Sarah arrived in a truck that wore the day's soot like a coat. She moved with the unshowy economy of someone who has spent weeks saying hard truths gently. From a prudent distance, she took in breath, posture, limb. 3rd degree, dehydrated, infections waiting at the door, she said. Not unkind. The math behind her eyes was simple and cruel, resources thin, suffering thick. We can end it, someone offered, soft as a mercy. Evan looked at the small cat, who refused even now to surrender her gaze. He could have agreed, it would have been defensible. Instead, something steadier than impulse rose in him and stood its ground. "Let me try," he said, surprising himself with the calm. "I'll take responsibility. I can isolate her. I'll cover supplies." He didn't say the rest. "I am willing to fail correctly, if that is where this goes." Sarah studied him, then the cat, then the slope that seemed to lean with the weight of everything burned. The pause was almost a liturgy. Finally, she opened a kit: sedative, antibiotic, burn cream, gauze, a list that was half protocol, half prayer. "If she worsens, you call," she said. "If she can't turn the corner, we do what's necessary." He nodded. Agreement sat heavy but right. He named her Ember in the cab, not to claim, but to keep his hands moving. At the rentals shed, a rectangle of shade, concrete floor, cool as a held breath, he slid the kennel in, added water and meat, then withdrew. She met every approach with the authority of pain. Leather gloves kept his skin but not his certainty. The first rinse of saline opened his thumb through the seam. Blood found its way down his wrist and disappeared into cuff. He learned the edge of her reach by counting stitches. He changed strategy because change was the only thing that had worked for the forest. He read aloud, voice low and square. "The way you talk when you need your hands to believe you." Pages from old field notes. Rainfall. A blue oak that had re-leafed against every prediction. He did not reach unless he had shown the path his hand would take. He did not block her line of sight. He let silence sit until silence softened. Some nights she wouldn't drink while he sat there. He would step outside and listen to the bowl click against the floor, a sound like relief wearing metal shoes. Some mornings she had shredded the towel the way a storm shreds flags. He respected the message. Wild is supposed to resist comfort. On the 7th day, the fever broke its hold a little. He opened the kennel with the same slow hinge as always and waited until waiting felt like grammar. He irrigated the wound, eyes on the margin where healthy met hurt. She trembled. She did not strike. A thin, uncertain sound rose from her chest, not warning, not plea. He knew that frequency. A purr found its footing and lengthened, as if some old engine had remembered fuel. Trust did not enter like a guest. It condensed on surfaces, in pauses, at the edges of work. He recorded temperatures, appetite, eliminations, the ordinary parades that mean life. He trimmed contact as healing advanced, not because he wanted distance, but because distance was the point. When she tested the kennel's bars less and the world more, he slid in a box that rattled with live mice. The first attempt looked like doubt wearing claws. The second ended quickly and clean. He spoke less as days lengthened. The chair grew familiar to his knees. Moths battered the bulb in their old, foolish orbit, and she tracked them with eyes that had rediscovered geometry. He learned to be proud of not being needed. He learned to sit in a room and practice absence while present. The legs sealed along a clean, pale seam, the body's handwriting over catastrophe. Fur tufted toward it and stopped, as if leaving a path to remember by. Her gait improved to a measured favoring, then a confident, almost jaunty stride. She ate with a hunter's economy and slept like something ready to move. When he called Sarah to report the scar's integrity, the appetite, the small proofs of readiness, the line in his voice had changed, not victory, clarity. The next step would be the hardest good thing. A door opened, not to keep, but to give back. Fog held the low country that morning the way a hand holds water, loosely, allowing streams of light to run through. They chose a margin where black met green, where fire's handwriting ended and springs began. Sarah stood a little back, arms folded. The kind of quiet that means agreement has already been earned. Evan set the kennel on the ground so his shadow would not cross its mouth. Boundaries keep their power when you keep yours. He pressed the latch. Metal answered with a soft click that seemed larger than it was. Then nothing, which was exactly right. In the shed, he had learned to let stillness arrive before any next thing. He stepped aside until he could no longer touch the door without taking a step forward. He would not step forward. Inside the crate, Ember held herself in the threshold, the way a word holds on the tongue, not yet spoken. Whiskers tested the air. Ears mapped invisible currents. The scar on her foreleg picked up the pearl light and drew a thin, pale line into the day. She had been a patient because pain required it. She was not a pet. She was a wild body measuring a path, a toe length, a breath, then movement. She flowed out low the way cats pour themselves into grass. Her weight pressed a small signature into the ash-soft soil, the kind that blows away by noon. She did not look at him first. She looked at the ground, then the brush, then the space between. Each looked like a question she already knew the answer to. He kept his hands quiet at his sides. No reaching, he had written in the notebook that lived by the chair. Now the rule lived in him. He wanted something, of course he did. A last contact, some human shape to close the circle. But circles in the wild close where they must, not where you prefer. She turned then, a simple pivot that placed her profile against the fog, like a lithograph. In that glance there was no debt, no bowing of some imagined thread between them. What he read, because he had trained himself to read without wanting, was placement. I know where you are in this moment. That was all. That was enough. Behind them, the creek stitched itself audibly around stones, as if to underline continuity. A towhee scratched in the duff and declared ownership of nothing but its small, bright life. Evan's mouth found the line he had never written down because paper is too flat for such sentences. He said it the way you say a vow to yourself, low, even for memory, more than for meaning. The wild remembers. Not as people do, not with anniversaries and stories told in kitchens. Memory in a landscape travels by other routes, seed banks waiting decades for a heat signal, deer trails passed down in steppes, muscle maps in predators that redraw themselves after injury. Whatever it is called in a bobcat, it had carried her to the threshold and now carried her away. She flicked her tail once, punctuation, not farewell, and entered the chaparral. Brush closed as if a zipper had been pulled up the hillside. The place where she had been held her shape a breath longer, then wind unstitched even that. He remained at the open door, because leaving is also an action. Sarah exhaled a thin smile, equal parts relief and the unromantic joy of a plan completed to spec. Evan closed the latch without noise. Absence, he had learned, is the form that true help takes at the end. He stood in it, uncomplicated, and let the morning widen. Evening leaned across the ridge and set edges glowing. Heat drained off the granite in size, and the creek below found its rounder voice. Each stone counted twice, once by water, once by light. Evan stood where the grass remembered his knees, binoculars capped, hands quiet at his sides. The hour had the feel of pages turned carefully. They appeared again as if edited into the slope. First, a ripple in oatgrass, then outlines sharpening between manzanita. Ember stepped into a notch of shadow, high on the contour line that reads like a vein across the hillside. Behind her, two cats followed at an easy interval, muscled, lean, sure-footed, not cubs, not yet full-weight adults. Their coats carried the gold of late summer and the freckles of youth like constellations still being named. He did not lift the glass. Naked eye was the right distance. He took them in the way you take in a tide pool, without casting a shadow over it. Ember held, not posing, simply existing in a balance she owned. The left foreleg showed the pale seam again, a quiet line catching dusk, the way a creek catches sky and makes a small river of it. She looked down slope and found him. There was no climb in her shoulders, no quiver of fight or flee. She read the scene the way a matriarch reads a room she has built by surviving it. The younger pair mirrored her poise, their ears canted not outward for threats, but inward for cues. One marked a stem with whisker and cheek, the other tasted the air and kept the tongue, for now, a secret. Their presence turned the earlier moment on the ridge into something with a second echo, recognition expanding into legacy. Life had not only resumed, it had multiplied and distributed itself into the future. Ember moved, 3 deliberate steps that brought her to the contour, where his scent braided with sage. She did not close the last yard. Wild owns the right to exact distances. Instead, she turned her shoulder as if to align with him on a single axis, slope, creek, man, cat. And in that small alignment he felt the landscape itself nod, then the head bump. She passed within a hand's breadth, crown tipping into his thigh, with a pressure calibrated to the hinge of a knee. Brief, firm, entire. The touch was not a favor, it was a mark, written in the grammar of wild permission. This is the shape of your place and this is mine. The purr rose once more, a deep, resonant engine that found the old frequency in his bones and thrummed there as if dusting off a shelf. He did not move to answer. The answer was already present. Stillness, respect, a line left uncrossed. He let his breath be the only visible thing about him, slow as dusk. She stepped past, and the space she vacated relit, grass springing back as if light had weight. The younger two followed, pausing a heartbeat to look, not at him, but through him, the way you look through clean water and see the rock underneath. In their eyes was not story, but competence. They belonged here, and everything about them said so. They slipped into chaparral. Manzanita closed. The hill resumed its untidy grammar of stems and shadows. For a few seconds, there was still the suggestion of them, the way the air holds an afterimage when you stare at the sun through leaves. Then even that was gone. The silence that returned was different from the one that had warned him. This one carried weight the way a bell carries it, silence with tone. With memory resonating inside, he stood within it, revised by the day, and let the creek finish a sentence only water knows how to say. Back at the cabin, dusk laid lavender across the sill and turned the window screen into a soft grid of gold. Wood ticked as it cooled. Moths interviewed the porch light and fired no one. Evan opened the laptop and let the cursor blink on an empty line until the day arranged itself into language that could stand in public. Adult female bobcat Lynx rufus, observed with 2 mature offspring, extinct 1824 male. Distinct old burn scar on left foreleg. Behavior alert, non-aggressive, brief tactile contact initiated by adult female, forehead to human thigh. Condition: good. Gait symmetrical with mild historical favoring. Habitat: recovering chaparral oak mosaic. Prey base active, lagomorph arch rodent sign present. Riparian corridor functioning as movement route. Inference: stable breeding predator presence, trophic structure rebounding. He read the lines once, the way a ranger reads a topo, looking for what is useful and leaving out what will not help anyone find their way. Data is a kind of kindness when it stays honest. It lets budgets harden where they should, and trails bend where animals do. Still, the square edges of the paragraphs could not hold the exact pitch of a purr felt through boot leather, or the brief weight of a head setting a man into place like a stake before wind. He saved the file and closed the lid. The room widened to the sounds a house makes when it remembers it is mostly wood and air. Beyond the glass, the ridge darkened into a single, long shape. Somewhere out there, 3 bodies moved with the confidence of creatures aligned to food and cover and the old grammar of slope. He thought about scars. Fire does not only erase, it writes. Some seeds won't open without heat. Some cones insist on flame as their key. The creek below had redrawn itself after the flood years, forgetting one bend and remembering another older one, as if memory in water was simply patience plus gravity. Ember's scar had become more than healed tissue. It was a map. It had led his eyes to recognition and, if maps can run both directions, led her back along a corridor of sense and scent to the same knuckled rise. He did not pretend she had come to thank him. Gratitude is a human furniture that doesn't sit right in wild rooms. What he could say, quietly, was that boundaries kept 10 years ago had borne their intended fruit, an animal that owed nothing and thrived anyway. Help had ended in absence. Absence had left room for the right presence. Hers, with offspring, in a system remembering itself. A breeze lifted and slid along the floor, carrying pine and creek and the faint, iron sweetness of warm stone. He felt the day settle into the kind of memory that doesn't need retelling to persist. Some recollections live in muscle, the crouch that keeps you small, the restraint that keeps the wild intact, the instinct to measure so that future decisions have backbone. Others live in phrases you do not write down because paper flattens them. He said it once more. for himself and for the slope outside that had taught it to him. The wild remembers. Then he let the room be quiet enough to prove it. This was not a rescue ode, nor a debt collected. It was a boundary kept and a life returned to where it belongs. If we are gentle with our nearness, the wild does its own remembering, in scars that become maps, and in offspring that carry the line forward. That is enough. This is Paw Prints and Stories. Stay gentle, the wild remembers. Disclaimer: this story is for inspiration and education. Do not handle, feed, or rehabilitate wildlife without professional guidance and explicit local authorization. Always follow laws and consult licensed experts.